Chapter 14. After she left Philip, Rue spent the rest of the morning in the garden. The black squirrel watched from his perch on the tree as Rue carried buckets of river water into the garden and spilled it out onto the earth. It was lovely to see the parched soil drink up the water, but it was never enough. It had gone thirsty for too long. As she worked, her mind kept wandering back to Philip. He would want to see the garden again, she knew. He would want to know that it hadn't been completely destroyed after all. But each time she had nearly convinced herself that she should tell him, another part of her argued vociferously against it. If she did tell him, no doubt he would go and tell Violet or Mrs. Valentine or his father, and then the garden would be shut off forever and left to die. Rue had been thinking so deeply about this while filling her bucket by the river that she didn't see the canoe until it was right in front of her, bouncing lightly in the shallows. In the daylight she saw that Jack's hair was such a pale blonde it was nearly silver where the sun hit it. But his skin was tan and his cheeks were ruddy. His clothes were strangely formal, black dress pants and an untucked button-down white dress shirt, but they were too big on him, and tattered and dirty in places. His head was tilted to one side, watching Rue with quiet interest. "Why are you staring at me like that?" Rue asked finally, glowering with discomfort. "You look different," he answered. Rue felt her gut pinch. She suddenly remembered that he'd only seen her from a distance and at night. Now he saw her up close, in the light of day. He would realize how plain she was. It hurt her feelings, but she still answered defiantly. "This is what I look like." He maneuvered the canoe close to the rocks, plunging his paddle into the shallow water to hold it still. "Do you want to come for a ride?" he asked. "I'm busy." Jack glanced at her bucket and then back at her. "The water will still be in the river when you get back." Thoughts of the Fain crept into Rue's mind. What had Violet said? That the Fain was a water creature, not human at all? But that was silly, of course, she told herself. He was just a boy. But still, when she looked at him, she found that his beauty was almost otherworldly. "Can't swim," Rue said. "You won't have to," he replied. Rue stared uncertainly at the little canoe. "Will it hold two people? What if I sink it?" He laughed. "You don't weigh more than a rabbit." He stretched out his hand and kept it there, waiting until she made her decision. After a few moments' deliberation, she put the bucket down and stepped across the rocks. Leaning over, she took Jack's hand. He steadied her as she stepped into the canoe. "Bend your legs," he told her when the canoe began to rock. She shifted her body until the rocking settled, and then sat down opposite Jack. The sun had squeezed his pupils into pinpricks. His irises looked so unnaturally gray that Rue once again found herself thinking of the Fain. But then the canoe slid away from the shore, putting the sun behind them, and his eyes looked more human again. At first, Rue gripped the edges of the canoe, her heart lurching every time they hit a wave. But it wasn't long before she felt her body adjust to the motion. The little canoe rode the river lightly, rearing and dipping, while Jack deftly maneuvered it. The water seemed to be grabbing the paddle at each stroke, passing the canoe hand to hand over its surface. There were other boats on the river, though Jack avoided coming too close to these. Once, though, a fisherman spotted them. He stood up in his boat and shielded his eyes against the sun to see them better. Tonight he'll tell his friends that he saw the Fain, thought Rue, and that a strange girl was with him. Maybe they'll think I'm a sea creature too. Rue smiled. Suddenly a long, loping shadow appeared above them. Rue looked up to see the white belly of a heron, its slender legs stretched behind it and its neck folded back against its shoulders. Rue expected the bird to pass on by, but instead it seemed to hover over them, keeping pace with the canoe. Now and then it would fly ahead of them and circle back, finally disappearing altogether when a large freighter trudged through the seaway. "It's almost like that bird was following us," Rue said. "He was. That's Sir." "He's yours?" Rue asked, amazed. Jack laughed. "I'm his," he said. "He adopted me. He stays with me through the winter, even though most of the other herons go south. He knows everything that happens on this river. He even told me when you first arrived here." Ruth shot him a doubtful look, but then she remembered seeing the heron that flew over the Boston whaler on her way to Cough Rock, and how Miss Valentine had said it was odd to see the bird at that time of year. On and on they went, past stretches of polished shoal, peppered with cormorants, weaving around islands, some with homely cottages and others with gigantic mansions. The beauty of the St. Lawrence was staggering. Great green knolls rose up out of the water like a relief map come to life, forming complicated labyrinths. The canoe, skirted by a tremendous cliff made of red-veined rock. Jack pointed out a raven's nest on the cliff, but even Rue's sharp eyes could not make it out. Jack lifted his chin and let out a low, croaking sound, and a shiny blackbird emerged magically from one of the fissures. She croaked in response, staring down at them as they passed. Finally, they came to a narrow channel between two of the larger islands. Jack rowed up to the top of the channel, then lifted his paddle out of the water. "What are you doing?" Rue asked nervously. Jack didn't answer. He stretched out his legs and leaned back a little. The canoe bobbled in place for a moment. Then something seemed to seize, and the next second they were shooting down the channel. The little canoe vaulted over waves, then pitched down again at breathless speed. To Ruth's surprise, she wasn't frightened at all. In fact, it made her laugh out loud, which seemed to delight Jack. The water sounded like it was laughing too, the muted, trilling sound of someone laughing in a rainstorm. Then suddenly it was over. The canoe slowed. Jack put out his paddle again and began to row. "What was that?" Rue asked, catching her breath and smiling. "Dumb Founder's current. It sucks you in and spits you straight out the other side." "The river sounded like it was laughing," Rue said. It was. He looked at her thoughtfully for a moment, then said, "I think I know why you look so different." Rue's smile dissolved. "Why?" She eyed him warily. "You're not fighting the wind anymore," Jack said. Rue frowned. "I don't know what you mean," she said. Jack tucked his head down and hunched his shoulders slightly, and there it was. The same look she had always noticed in the mirror, the look of a thief. It bothered her that he had seen it too. "So what do I look like now?" she asked. "Like a girl who might capture a Fane," he replied, smiling lightly. She didn't know how to respond, so she turned away and fixed her eyes on a shoal covered with birds. The birds were small, with soft gray bodies that tapered to white around their bellies. Their black masks scooped up over their skulls, and their slender bills were the deepest red, tipped with black. "What are they?" Rue asked, grateful to be able to change the subject. "Terns. They're nesting." Rue squinted against the sun and searched the shoal. "But I don't see any nest," Rue said. "That's because terns are terrible parents," Jack said, an unusual edge of irritation in his voice. "They put their nests in any old place and don't even bother to make them well. Just a few twigs and leaves. And then the gulls come along and bully them, and off the terns fly, leaving their eggs for the gulls to eat or smash. Sometimes the terns stick it out long enough for the eggs to hatch, but then the gulls swoop down and carry the chicks off. The adult terns barely even put up a fight." He turned his head suddenly and stared at the craggy section of the shoal. "I see you," he whispered. "Who is it?" Rue asked. But Jack just held up his fingers to his lips. Spinning the canoe around, he began paddling close to the bank until he crept alongside a low outcropping by the shoal's edge. He leapt out, then held the canoe steady for Rue. She stepped onto the shoal and looked around, trying to find whoever had caught Jack's attention. All she saw were birds, though, scampering around in a panic at the sight of them. "This way," Jack whispered, and in a flash he was bounding easily across the rocks. The shoal was wet and slick, and though she was naturally sure-footed, Rue slipped several times. Up ahead, Jack stopped abruptly. He held out his hand for Rue to stop too. Then he did the oddest thing. Shoving his hands back in his pockets, his body seemed to go slack. He cocked one leg and his shoulders slumped. All his muscles seemed to loosen and relax. He stood like this for a moment, just as though he was waiting for a bus, before squatting down and smoothly scooping up something in his hands. When he stood, he was holding a slender, dark brown thing that squirmed in his grip like a fish. "What is it?" Rue asked. "Come look." As Rue came closer, she saw that the creature had already begun to settle down in Jack's hands. Now she could see that it had a damp, sleek fur and a pointed, fern-like snout. Jack brought the snout close to his face. "I'm on to you," he said to the animal. "Won't he bite you?" Rue said. "She," he corrected, "and she won't. We're old friends." He loosened his grip, and the lithe animal crawled up Jack's arm and settled on his shoulder. "She's a mink," Jack said, "and a pig for turn eggs. I keep taking her off the shoal, but she keeps swimming back. I'll find a smashed shell on the rocks, the inside's gone, and there she is, skulking away. Between the gulls and this one, it's pretty bleak for the turn eggs. I patrol the shoal a few times a day. It's sort of hopeless, but still, I can't help myself, you know?" She did know. Before she could stop herself, Rue blurted out, "I found a garden. It's been kept secret for so long that everything in it is dead. I've been watering it, but it's so big and it's so hot in there that the soil doesn't stay damp for long. I can't keep up, but how can I stop? It's like you and the turn eggs." Jack nodded. He thought for a moment. "The garden must have a sprinkler system, though," he said. "There's a panel of switches and timers in the basement. That might be for the sprinklers, but all the wires are cut. I think my uncle must have done it." And then she told him what Philip had said about the garden and his mother's death. Jack listened carefully. The mink took the opportunity to scamper down his arm and try to escape, but Jack caught her and held her to his chest. "If you want," Jack said, when she was finished, "I could help you. The garden might stand a better chance if there were two of us working on it." When Rue hesitated, Jack lowered his head and whispered to the mink, "She doesn't trust me." It made Rue smile. "I do," she said. "I think I do." They took the mink to a wooded island far from the tern's nesting place. Clearly it was a ride the mink had taken often. She stayed by Jack's feet in the canoe, occasionally stretching herself out across his shoes. Once she even approached Rue, nuzzling at her ankles. Rue kept perfectly still, delighted, her eyes darting between Jack and the mink. Slowly, very slowly, Rue bent down, and with the tip of her forefinger she touched the mink's silky head. The mink tensed for a second, but when she didn't dart away, Rue let her fingers slide down the mink's neck and along her back. "You're good with animals," Jack said, surprised. Rue nodded. "I'm just not good with people." As Jack neared the shore, the mink seemed to know when they had arrived at her new home. She leapt onto his seat and then dove off the edge of the canoe. She swam the short distance to the bank and scrambled onto land, her wet coat now inky black, then disappeared into the woods. "Do you think she'll go back to the shoal?" Rue asked. "I know she will, but so will I." They had only been gone for a little over an hour, but when they returned to Cough Rock, a faint rosy light was already simmering in the sky beneath the blue. By dusk it would turn flamingo pink, and the night would shut it down completely, and the stars would push through. There had never been skies like this in Limpet. For the first time in her life, Rue felt at home in the bigness of things, in the river that she could not see the end of, and the sky that held both stars and herons. Jack wedged his paddle in the shallow rocks, and Rue leapt out before he could offer her a hand. "Now she's jumping off canoes like a mink," he said. "Like a rat," Rue corrected. "Like a river rat."